Hello, good afternoon, Pickems enjoyers. Been waiting patiently for Valve to update, and they have finally done it. Quick heads up, as you can probably notice from my voice, I am doped up to the gills and eyes with flu medication. I popped a bunch of it so I can make this video, then crash back into bed. So please do have some patience with me if I am not as cohesive and coordinated in explaining and expressing myself as usual. I'll do my best. If I need to take a couple breaks for a drink here or there, I'm sure you'll understand. But we'll start off with the elimination stage first, and then we'll crack on into the playoffs because the results and how things kind of shape up is very important to take into account through the elimination stage. Plus, some of you told me in the previous video it's really helpful when I'm expressing these things because a lot of you haven't been able to watch a lot of the games due to the start time because you have school or you have work or whatever else, or there are other obligations. Like obviously in the EU, it's a super early start time. So, in the elimination stage, really the biggest story is that Na'Vi crashed out. They crashed and burned, and they looked really off in the process. A lot of the reasons why I had them kind of pitted as one of my favorites coming into this major as defending champions is that one element of Na'Vi that we'd seen consistently over since Copenhagen was that strategically they were sound. Individually, they may not have any of like the best players on the planet, but they're very good at sharing the burden of weight. If JL's popping off, then Bit can be a bit more chill. If he's popping off, Ema can be a bit more chill, etc. And they kind of all share it. And there were elements of that, but unfortunately, no one ever really got out of like third or fourth gear. We didn't see Bit take over at any point. It was very quiet and honestly super underwhelming and quite disappointing. And you can make the same argument for JL as well. It was really towards the end, he tried desperately against Heroic, but it was kind of too little too late. And Emo was okay, pretty solid across the board. Wonderful was quiet for large spells, did show up against Heroic, and had it have not been for Wonderful's brilliance, individual craziness on Ancient, which was the third and final map that went 13-9 to Heroic, it could have been a lot more one-sided. This could have been a super one-sided best of three, actually, because even though they did pick up the one map, that includes like Na'Vi getting crushed 13-3 on Mirage. They got smashed. They got smashed by Spirit 13-2 on Mirage as well, and they lost to MIBR. Like it's kind of just not acceptable, and especially for a team that has Blade behind them as a coach and Alexi as their IGL, I just never saw them fading out of the elimination stage, and especially against some of the teams they lost to and the manner in which they lost. That for me was the biggest surprise. So no Na'Vi in the playoffs, pretty big storyline there. Mongolz were fantastic. As you can see here, I got 6 correct, so the Diamond Dream is still alive. But I went for the Mongolz. I thought that they could 3-0, but I wanted to be a bit more safe and go for a 3-1 pick, so I thought they may drop a map. They didn't. They went crushed it 3-0, and I had Spirit as my 3-0 pick, but they did drop their first map against Furia, which was quite surprising and shocking to me, and I thought they might not even make it after that point, because it was a 13-6 domination, to be honest. But they did make it through, just as a 3-1. And then I had my BR as my 0-3 pick, and they proved me wrong. They did really solid. They nearly even made it to the playoffs, losing to Mouz in that final 2-2 matchup. So we're still on track. We're still in pretty good shape. I'm pretty happy with how things have worked out here. But this is really where things get dialed up to 11. Quick warning, by the way, I had to put random teams in for my playoffs so that the coin would upgrade for gold so I could put it on my thumbnail. So this isn't actually what the teams I think are going to make it through will be, just as a quick heads up. And I'm going to explain now who I think the teams will actually be. So we'll start off with the Mongolz and Mouz. I did touch on just before that obviously the Mongolz went through and had a 3-0 run. Very impressive run as well, by the way. They beat G2 13-10. They beat Mouz 16-13 and Heroic 2-1. So they literally beat 3 teams that are at the playoffs. And we have a repeat matchup against them and Mouz. That's 16-13 over on Mirage. And I'm going to bring up as well the stats of that map here so you can see them for yourself. So one of the surprising elements of this is even though Mouz were getting a lot of the opening picks, Shui had 6 opening duels, 6 opening kills, they still just weren't really able to get it done. And it was the T side that was yielding a lot of rounds rather than the CT side. That for me is interesting because the Mongolz are a team that I feel like are really powerful on the T side, and this is going to factor in as to why I think they have the edge on Mouz, to be honest with you. Both teams now have had a chance to sit back and just watch and absorb what happens. But the Mongols have had longer amount of time, right? Because they went 3-0, and Mouz went through on the final day because they dropped a bunch of maps. So normally you'd think like they've had all this time to prepare, they've had all this time to really like factor in how do we anti-strat the Mongols, how do we get the upper hand on them. We lost last time, how do we make amends on that this time around? The thing is, though, that the Mongols, I think, is so difficult to anti-strat as a team because they're so fluid. It seems like reductive analysis for me to sit here and say they just hit their shots forehead. Like, you know, that's as simple as it is. But really, with the Mongols, a lot of their tactics, and I'm not trying to degrade their ability to make plays and have a playbook and these kinds of things. They definitely do. Don't underestimate these guys, but they're so good when it comes to these opening duels. They're so good when it comes to trade fragging and having players like Mazzinho crack open sites. He may not get the top in terms of like frags or ADR or rating, but he's there just chipping away, allowing Senzu and 9-10 to clean up afterwards. And that's kind of what happened here. You can see in terms of the performance rating, 9-10 had a blinder, really good performance with the AWP, popped off with 101 ADR, which is huge. And additionally, very quiet game for Brolan. 9 kills, 0.6, minus 12 kills to death, and only 42.7 ADR. Not a great game for Jimmy. It's not been a great tournament for Jimmy either. And additionally, on top of that, Mouz notoriously struggled with playoffs. It's another one of those narratives that comes in, and a lot of people are mentioning about the Mongols. Like, they don't have much experience, they're going to choke, these kinds of things. Well, Mouz also have that going against them. They have definitely turned away from that narrative a tad over this last sort of 4, 5, 6 months, but it is still open for debate. It still is out there. Exertion typically doesn't have great playoffs. Jimmy sometimes drops off. And Jimmy's rating right now for the major is only a 1.04. Shui is outperforming him right now. Shui's actually up there as one of their best players. And it's Exertion that is leading the charts with the 1.19 plus 12 kills. But again, when you go into playoffs, is that going to be consistent? Is he going to be able to continue to churn out those results, especially if some of the other pieces aren't there? So that's kind of my concern right now with this Mouz team, even if they've had time now to sit back and anti-strat and figure out where things went wrong on Mirage. Maybe Mirage gets played again, not sure, we'll have to wait and find out. But I think that Mongols are a very difficult team to actually anti-strat. And I think that a lot of it comes down to their individual flair and brilliance as a team when you have all of these young guns that play off momentum. Now, it is possible, as a devil's advocate point, that if Mouz starts strong on both maps, let's say they pick up the first pistol, they convert into like a 3-0, they win the first rifle, they get into a 5-0, the crowd gets a bit silent, the Mongols start to get a little bit timid. That's where I think you can see a shutdown here for Mouz. That's where I can see them beating the Mongols potentially 2-0. Because the Mongols are very much a momentum-based team. They will steamroll. We've seen this multiple times over the duration of the opening and elimination stage. They will steamroll you if they're given an opportunity to. And in particular, Senzu will steamroll you. He has been fantastic throughout this entire tournament. Consistently really sharp, really good. Some of the other players have had their ups, their downs, they've been a bit back and forth, but this is also a team that throughout the entirety of it, the spine of this roster, all 5 players, are capable of fragging. It's not like you have 2 players you're looking at to perform, Spirit anybody, but then, you know, if they don't perform, they're screwed. Even Techno, the guy that's at the bottom of the stats, is capable of popping off and having 20 kill games and having tons of impact. So this Mongols team, for me, I'm going to have them to make it through the semifinals. From what I've seen, they've looked really good. I just can't buy into this narrative that because it's playoffs now, they're going to choke. Because a lot of people were saying that about the elimination stage. A lot of people were saying that about the opening stage. And they have just cruised. They have cruised both of them. And they have beaten top flight opposition to get to this point. You got to respect them now. Like, you can't just keep hiding behind that narrative of like, they're going to choke, they're inexperienced. And they've even come out and said, by the way, and I could be wrong on this because of the meds, but I think they said that the crowd was helping them a great deal. And they said this before they even got the 3-0. So they're talking the talk and they're walking the walk. That was another element that people were unsure of. Is like, well, the Mongols, they are the Asian team. but they're not Chinese, so will they even get backed? And even if they do get backed by the crowd, that can be a detriment. It's not necessarily a net positive. They don't seem to give a shit. Like, to be blunt about it, they don't seem to care. They're still out here just cracking domes and getting wins. And so the Mongolz, for me, they're going to make it to the semi-finals, bare minimum. Spirit and Liquids is a little bit more, I would say, straightforward in terms of who I think is going to win this. So I'll just put Spirit out there right now. We'll discuss them a little bit more when I come back to speak about the Mongolz, but we'll talk about on Liquid a little bit first. Liquid, for me, are just very hit or miss. Like, they have the players to go far in this. They have the players to cause the upset. Spirit themselves, as I'll discuss a little bit later on, they have their shakes, they have their jitters, they have their problems. They're very top heavy in terms of their fragging. Donk or bust, basically, with maybe Shiro pops in for a really good performance here or there. But Liquid are not, they're not consistent enough with their players to make me think that they can exploit Spirit's weaknesses. And when you look at their run as well, they had a 13-10 loss in RV. They beat Gamer Legion 13-10. They beat Furia 13-9. A 2-1 win against MIBR. Their opening stage as well was 13-10 to Cloud9. Against Cloud9, I should say. They won against Cloud9. 13-10 wildcard, 2-1 FlyQuest. If we're being honest, that's one of the easiest runs to this point for Liquid. They've played a couple of, like, heavy hitters, I guess you could say, like Na'Vi. They lost to Na'Vi, but Na'Vi looked garbage. Like, they just weren't very good. And that was actually a game when I remember watching it, like, as it was happening. Liquid probably should have won that game. We're beating Gamer Legion, sure, solid team, but they didn't make it. Furia, sure, solid team, didn't make it. MIBR, narrow win. And then Cloud9 didn't make it. Wildcard did better than expected. And then FlyQuest also didn't make it. So I just look at the teams they've beaten, and I don't want to take anything away from their run, but it is on the easier side, especially if you compare that to someone like Heroic, which I'll discuss again when we get down to that G2 matchup. It's just not very... It's not very confidence building to me. And although the real story for Liquid right now is this redemption arc via Kindar, who, by the way, has been really good and is their second top-rated player for Liquid so far, only behind Ultimate. He's on a 1.11 and is getting so much impact in his T-side performances. Yes, he sometimes makes blunders where you're scratching your head, but he's also creating so much space. He's getting so much damage. He's just chipping away. But more importantly, something that people don't talk about enough and don't think about enough is so much of Counter-Strike is conditioning the CT side when you're playing on T sides. It's not necessarily about getting success. It's not necessarily about running into a site and getting 3 entry frags. It's showing presence and keeping that in the back of your opposition's mind. Think about like an Inferno. If you never take banana control throughout the entire map, the CTs are just big chilling and they're holding on to their incendiaries, their smokes, or they're taking banana control early on, and you're just basically playing yourself into a really awkward position on the T side. If you constantly have someone just being a pain in the ass, and that's what Yekindar is, he's a nuisance, he's a pain in the ass. If you have someone like that that's constantly just chipping away and just being annoying, and sure, he might die a couple of times, but he's going to make the CTs respect that Banana is going to constantly be pushed into, and they're going to have to throw down their grenades. They're going to have to respect that possibility if he just pushes in by himself and gets an entry or two, as he has multiple times at the major so far. And this, for me, is a real redemption arc story for Yekindar. He may have bought himself more time in this roster now, regardless of what happens against Spirit. Unless he completely, like, shits the bed, which I don't really see happening, then you got to give him his praise. He's came under a lot of duress, a lot of scrutiny, a lot of people memeing him, but he's been really solid at this major. He's been really good. He's been a big part as to why Liquid has got some of these wins. And although NAF started really slow in the opening stages of the major, he's starting to step it up now. He's starting to catch up a little bit. I discussed this back at the elimination stage, why I had Liquid as my last team to progress, was because I was worried about NAF. And NAF did pop off on a couple of maps, which was great to see. So Liquid, they have the parts, they have the pieces. As I said before, there is a way in which they beat Spirit and they make a run through to the finals. I think there is a possibility of that happening, genuinely. But I've not seen enough consistency to believe in these guys over Spirit. And so I'm going to just go with Spirit. But I am a little bit nervous about that pick, to be completely honest. And also, consider this. The last time they played each other, back at Blast Final Fall at the end of September, Liquid did actually beat Spirit 2-1. They won against them on Nuke and Anubis, and they lost us too. So the last time they fought against each other, which was like a month and a half, 2 months ago, Liquid won. So like this isn't some kind of like David versus Goliath that people are making it out to be. Spirit are the favorite, and I think they will win. But Liquid do have a puncher's chance, 100%. They have an opportunity to maybe make something happen here. Does Spirit choke? They're also a team that's gone absent in a lot of playoffs over the years. Especially this last year, I'm saying over the years, but I'm thinking of previous iterations. But in this iteration, in this roster, there's been playoffs where they just haven't showed up, where big parts like Shiro have disappeared, where Magix and Zontix have just completely disappeared. So I think Spirit win, but I'm not 100% on this one. I don't think it's as cut and dry as a lot of people are making out to be. G2 and Heroic is another super close game that a lot of people I just see, like, G2 win. And I'm not so sure about this, you know. I think G2 were looking a little bit shaky. And if it hadn't have been for their win against FaZe, where they absolutely crushed FaZe to make it through to the playoffs, if that was a closer game, I reckon a lot of people would have a very different opinion on G2 right now. So let's take it into perspective. They beat the Mongolz 13-10. Oh, sorry, they lost to the Mongolz 13-10, I should say. They beat Big, who went 0-3, 13-5. They beat 3D Max, who were really underwhelming and disappointing, who also lost to MIBR, of course, in that very first game. They beat them 13-8. And then they did smash FaZe, like 13-4 on Inferno and 13-3 on Mirage. It was destruction, like a real difficult game to watch, as I had 2 players in my fantasy league from FaZe and they got obliterated. So that's the game, I think, where people were like, all right, this G2's got something, they're cooking right now. And they, to be fair, you can only beat what's against you. It's the fact that they lost to the Mongols where I'm a little bit less impressed with them, and the 2 wins they got against teams that didn't even make it, one of which went 0-3, Big just kind of got outclassed. The good news though for G2 is m0NESY, who had a really rough start to this major, who was having a real rough time of it back at the RMRs, he is making a return. 1.33 with plus 27 kills. Really, really solid. Now keep in mind that the last time I talked about m0NESY, he was on -8 kills to deaths over the duration of like 5 or 6 maps. So that's a huge improvement. And a lot of them were against FaZe, to be fair. They smurfed against FaZe. They got a very comfortable win against Big. So padding the stats a little bit, sure. But still, you can't take anything away from m0NESY. He's been playing really well in the elimination stage. Nico's also doing great. Plus 23 kills and a 1.35. So you got 2 of the star players, 2 of the best players on the planet in their respective roles, and they are laying down the law. That's great news for G2. That's one of the reasons why I think people are really believing in them. I see a lot of people to say they're favourites to win the major now that Na'Vi are no longer taking part in this. But one of the things that concerns me a little bit is that Mouz is struggling just a tad. Him and Hunter aren't quite living up to that same level and stature as Nico and m0NESY. And although m0NESY has stepped it up, the way that Heroic have been playing, and Dexter in particular, man, if they shut down m0NESY, I think this Heroic team can win. Genuinely, I think that they can. I've been so impressed with Nerds. Tesses has been a little bit off the boil, but like this Heroic team can punish G2, and they can punish them hard. So Mouz has been a little bit off the boil, but I mean, everyone has over a 1.0 rating, and they had like everyone pulling their weight to a certain degree, but Mouz is in the same position as m0NESY, where he has 8 more deaths than kills. That's maybe a little bit of a problem that Heroic can look to exploit into, but there's been enough time now for G2 where they've been able to sit back, maybe figure out where they've been going wrong slightly, and they can just, you know, effectively come into this one as prepared as possible. It can happen. Last time they played Heroic, it was a 10-13 on Dust 2, by the way, where Heroic did win. And that was with Nico having a freak off game at a 0.6 rating with just 9 kills. So, again, last time they played each other, Heroic did get the upper hand. It goes to show that G2, they're not immortal, they're not infallible against Heroic. They can be beaten. But that being said as well, to play on the other side of things, before then was 5 wins in a row for G2, and that goes back to Katowice early in this year, which was a narrow loss back on OT on Anubis. So other than that win against us too on Heroic, it has been pretty much G2 sided. But we are into the playoffs of a major. I think although it helps to add a little bit of colour and sort of fill in a little bit of the blanks, the playoffs of a major, it's a different ball game. It's a different experience. I still factor into this whole narrative with G2 of being like, because it's the last dance, because Nico wants to win a major with Hunter before he goes off to greener pastures. I think people are playing too much into that narrative as like it's all a positive thing. There can come some serious self-imposed pressure with that as well that can really harm people, can really harm players. It doesn't seem to have so far, but I'm thinking when you start to get to the latter stages of this playoff, is that where it starts to come full circle and starts to be detrimental rather than a positive? I'm going to have G2 to win the game. I'm going to have G2 to beat Heroic, but I can see this being a 3-mapper. I can see it being close, and I can see it going to the wire. Now, for the final game, I'm going with Vitality. The reasons why is I've been so underwhelmed with this FaZe squad. So underwhelmed. Realistically, they could have genuinely lost against Furia. It was a really narrow game. It was scary to watch if you're a FaZe fan, and it did not fill me with much confidence whatsoever. Just gonna quickly blow my nose, guys. Give me 1 sec. Apologies for that. The meds are starting to wear off. I'm struggling. It was really lackluster performance from FaZe, and it didn't fill me with confidence at all. It was the classic thing that I discussed before, where it was like FaZe are always going to manage to find a way. They're going to scrap. They're going to fight. They're going to bite. They're going to claw. They're going to scratch, like everything, just to make it through. And they did. It's classic FaZe. And sure, they do normally have an increase. They do normally have a power up when it comes to the playoffs of majors, the playoffs of tournaments, but their level is so far below what you normally see, where like Rain had a really rough elimination stage. Brokey's continuing to really badly struggle. He's down at a 0.9 with minus 16 kills, by the way. And you have Rops and Frozen both at the top of the stats with a 1.07 each, but no one is really stepping up in a huge way. You know, when you consider that, like, you have, as I just mentioned before, Munacy in the 1.2s, Nico in the 1.2s. When you look at Vitality, they've got just like crazy amounts of talent in the form of obviously ZywOo, who's on 1.49 right now, second behind Donk with plus 36 kills. Everyone's over 1.15. Like, they are a team that is popping off right now coming into this, and FaZe have barely been able to hold on for dear life. And when you look at their run as well, it's pretty underwhelming. A 13-10 win against Wildcard. They lost to Heroic 13-8. They did beat Mouz, which is maybe a small marker against Mouz, but then they got absolutely annihilated by G2 in that 13-4, 13-3 I discussed before, and then they narrowly won against Furia. So it's typical kind of FaZe, but they've looked so rough over the duration of the major that I just don't believe they can up their level fast enough to catch up with how good Vitality have been looking. And I will say, though, to put in a caveat, there may be some false confidence about this Vitality squad. I'm going to be very honest with this. Even though I've backed them a lot in the past, and I do believe in them here to go far in the playoffs, I do want to just highlight that their run is one of the easiest to this point compared to the Heroics and the other teams. Like, when you consider that Heroic, they beat Big 13-7, they beat FaZe 13-8, they lost to the Mongolz 2-1, they lost to Spirit 2-1, and then they beat Na'Vi 2-1. This is a mega legit run. Other than maybe Big, you can make an argument, who went out 0-3, that is all top flight opposition. And they were close losses to the Mongolz and Spirit. Really close losses. When you also consider that, like, it could have been way more one-sided if Wonderful wasn't popping off, I think Heroic's run to this point is it should be respected. Vitality's is not the same. So I'll read out Vitality's run here. In the elimination stage, they beat Gamer Legion 13-7. They beat Furia 16-13 in overtime, really close, and they struggled. And then they beat MIBR 2-0. None of those teams made it. None. In the RMR, they beat Gamer Legion again, so they beat them twice. They beat BetBoom 13-3, and they beat FaZe 2-0. Now, they crushed all the opposition they've played against. They haven't dropped a map so far up until this point, although they've been close a couple of times. But you hear those teams, and that's a FaZe that started really poorly back at the RMRs. While they've looked good, their run to the playoffs is probably like the most straightforward team. And they struggled to beat Furia in OT. Like, that's a little bit concerning for me. Maybe there is false confidence. Maybe there's a bit of a false narrative with just how good Vitality are looking when you kind of peel things back a couple of layers and you're like, oh, they've beaten, like, not bum teams, that's disrespectful, but they've beaten teams that aren't at the playoffs. They've beaten teams that were kind of like farming teams for most people. So that is one thing that I think may very well hold them back just a tad. But you can only beat what's against you, and they've done that, right? So they deserve that respect, but they have not been truly tested just yet. The closest they got was against Furia, which was OT. Now, this is where things get really, really tough. I'm going to say that I think Spirit beat the Mongolz. It pains me to say this. I've got to admit, I love watching the Mongolz play. They're my favourite team to watch right now in terms of their aggression, their style, their flair. They come across as super likeable guys. They got a good map pool. They're super young. They got so much energy. And I would love to see the Mongolz make it to the grand finals. I really would. But I think Spirit are just going to be a little bit too good. I think there is going to be a certain level of... There's going to be a certain level of excellence when it comes to Donk, when it comes to Shiro. Hopefully, if Spirit's pieces really pop off, where I think Spirit will make it through to the finals, and they'll just eclipse Mongolz. Now, I will say, if the Mongolz crush Mouz and they run through to the semifinals and they absolutely annihilate Mouz, and it's a proper declaration, I can see them beating Spirit. Because they are a momentum-based team. I said this before. They're like a snowball that's picking up pace rolling down the hill. At some point, that's going to build into an avalanche, and you're just screwed. And if that happens, I think the Mongolz will beat Spirit. But I think it's going to be a really close, intense, difficult game for the Mongolz that they may just scrape by, and then I'll have Spirit to just scrape by them to make it to the finals. A big part of me wants to go for Mongolz in the grand finals, though, I'm not going to lie. And then in the bottom match, I am going to go for Vitality to beat G2. I feel as if the G2 sort of fairy tale idea of NiKo winning a major before like going off to Falcons, I just don't really see it. I don't really see it. And I've seen enough shakiness with some of their performances, enough potential weaknesses in this squad where they're very reliant and top heavy in terms of NiKo and m0NESY. And I think Vitality are just like a better team across the board where everyone right now is performing well. Yes, you can make the argument they're padding their stats against lesser opposition. That's very much that's a fair point. But I think ZywOo is just so adaptive, so versatile. I think gone are the days of him having chokes in playoffs. A hybrid player that's very much going into the AK-47 a lot more, or even the M4 on the CT side, and this allows them less pressure when it comes to those big rounds, but you can always pull out the sniper if they need to, and I think Vitality are just better across the entire five. I think they just have more firepower, they just have better cohesion. You know, when you drop off from m0NESY and NiKo to Mouz, who's having a struggle right now, and Hunter, I would argue that ZywOo dropping into Spinks and Flamesy and Mezzy, who's been having a really good major as well, by the way, is just more solid. I think there's way more that you can bank off with that team. I think in terms of the map pool, it's going to lend itself more to Vitality as well. And I think Vitality are going to get the win against G2. And then I think Vitality are going to go the full way, guys. I think Vitality are going to win the major. This is where I think in the grand finals, I think this is where the pressure is going to catch up with Spirit. Vitality have been here before, of course. They've got the W before. And I think this is where Donk and Shiro, if they are popping off and they're continuing their crazy form, like, for example, Spirit right now have Donk 1.55 with plus 51 kills, 106 ADR. And another one as well, by the way, is 31% of rounds so far for Donk and multi-kill rounds. That is absurd. That is like off the charts levels of absurd. So practically 1 in 3 rounds, Donk is getting a multi-kill. Jesus, like unreal. But you have to factor in as well, like they've kind of beat up on a few teams that aren't particularly great as well. Like they beat Furia, they lost to Furia, they beat Wildcard, smashed Na'Vi with Chopper having a life game on a 2.02 with 107 ADR, by the way, and they beat Heroic, which is a solid result. But that 16-14 Ancient honestly should have been Heroic. It could have easily been Heroic winning that game. So that's what's a bit concerning to me, is that I don't see Spirit having Donk perform at that level the entire way through the major. He's a phenomenal talent. He's a phenomenal player. Everyone knows this. But I don't see him carrying over that level of performance against teams like Wildcard and now playing against like Liquid, Mongolz, and then Vitality. So I think this is where we're going to see a bit of a drop-off. That drop-off is going to be the difference maker. So that's how I see it happening, guys. I see Vitality winning this major in the grand finals against Spirit. Do you agree or disagree? Comment below and let me know your thoughts. Are you a G2 believer? Do you think there's a way the Mongolz win this? Is it there may be a crazy upset where Liquid or Mouz or FaZe Clan even win this? I think a lot of people will be very low on FaZe belief because of how poor they've looked. But in playoffs, you never know with these guys. You never know. It's possible. There is a way it happens. Anyway, I'm going to go get myself some rest because my voice is giving out on me. Thank you so much for the support over these Pickems videos, guys. And hopefully, we get the diamond coin. Best of luck. See you in the next video.